Have you ever used 1 Corinthians 13 as a checklist to assess how you're doing? 1 Corinthians 13, that list about love that Karen read for us so beautifully. Love is patient and kind. Love is not jealous or boastful. Often it's a list that's read at weddings as if the love being described is a romantic kind of love, an ideal in a marriage. But that wasn't the purpose of the list at all. St. Paul wrote down his list about love to teach church people how to treat one another and those in the world. He wrote it probably about the year 50 or 60, and just a short time after Jesus had died. Paul had been to Corinth, Greece, and he had founded a church there, but now he's worried, and he sends them a letter. When Paul had been in Corinth, he had taught this brand new little band of Christians to gather together and share food around a table in remembrance of Jesus. The Greek word that Paul used for the meal, the Eucharist, it means thanksgiving. And the meal was to be like our Thanksgiving feasts in many ways, shared with all present around a big table. I imagine many loaves of bread, broken and shared all around among them, not merely the symbolic flat wafers or small bites of bread we use today. In Corinth, there would be wine in wineskins poured out for all, not just small sips that we take or the bare taste of wine when we intinct a wafer. By sharing a true feast among them all, according to Paul, the people would mark and remember Jesus, who fed people all the time, who gathered in meals, who described the kingdom of heaven as being like a great banquet. They would mark and remember Jesus, who lavishly loved us all. They would bring Jesus to mind regularly at each meal they shared. Gather, share, do this in remembrance of me. It was a wonderful teaching. But after Paul moved on from Corinth, word reached him that some people there were starting the Eucharist dinner before everyone could arrive. I can see how it would happen. Imagine Eucharist is set for 6 p.m. The people who had more control over their schedules and could arrange to be there right at 6 p.m. undoubtedly were diligent about putting down whatever they were doing, and they show up on time. But some other members of the congregation, certainly any who might be a slave or a servant, they couldn't leave their day jobs until their bosses gave the okay. Couldn't come to church until probably the boss's dinner had been served, the dishes cleared and washed. Perhaps the masters had gone to bed. These folks, lower on the social totem pole, often had to come late. It's the difference between some of us here who rely on 2 buses and the tea on a sparse Sunday schedule, and others of us who walk over from a house or condo nearby. The difference between the law firm associate who has to stay late and the partner who can duck out at 5 to get home for her child's play. The difference between someone with a painful hip and a walker making her way here and someone who walks over briskly if she's running late. In Corinth, the folks who had the most food to share came to the worship service first and handed around their full platters and caught up on news and met others like themselves, broadened their networks, supported each other. Those with less food to contribute arrived later, and they got the leftovers from the first seating. You see, it just happened. No one had intended it that way. But Paul is incensed. Don't you see, he writes, when I say love one another, it means this: love is patient and kind. Love is not jealous or boastful. Love is never arrogant or rude. Love doesn't insist on its own way. Love rejoices in the right and not in the wrong. 8, 10 words so far. How are we doing? If Paul gave the Corinthians and us a checklist. Love is patient. Kind. Well, I try. Not jealous. Not boastful. Love is never arrogant, never rude. Love rejoices in the right, what is right and true, and not in the wrong. No secret relief when some church members miss the 6 p.m. start. You know, their table manners aren't as good, and what would we have to say to them? Paul provides a checklist about love that still pushes and probes us today. You might print it out, maybe memorize it. 1 Corinthians 13, inspiring but tough. 8, 10 words about love that grow out of Paul's fury with his mentees. There's fury in Nazareth too. And Jesus is the one who picks the fight. It's actually not the way I remember that story, but here's what Luke explains. Jesus had just started his ministry. He's going to synagogues in the neighboring towns and preaching. Word has spread. He seems like a man of God with important insights. Everyone wants to hear him. And today he's here in Nazareth, his hometown. We are bursting with pride. Jesus picks this special day here with us in Nazareth to say something very special. He reads from the scroll of Isaiah to our congregation assembled in the synagogue these words: I've come to bring good news to the poor, to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free. And then Jesus says to us, his longtime friends, today this scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing. In our hearing. Jesus is saying to us, to his hometown, that he's the Messiah, the one that the entire nation has waited for so long. He has chosen us to be the ones he tells. We are honored and we are proud of him and we look at him fondly. What a good man Joseph's son has grown up to be. And we all had a little hand in it, didn't we? As Luke later records about that memorable day, we all spoke well of him and were amazed at the gracious words that came from Jesus' mouth, all of us proud that day. But then our feel-good day takes a very odd and sudden turn. It's not often how it's reported. People say that we hometown folks turn on Jesus because he was uppity, thinking he's better than we are. But it doesn't actually happen that way. In fact, we in Nazareth are stunned and confused because it is Jesus who suddenly gets defensive. First he says, out of the blue, doubtless you will quote to me this proverb, physician, cure yourself. What? We would tell him to pay attention to the log in his eye before pointing out the splinter in ours. We're not criticizing him. Jesus is getting our accolades, but he responds by saying, you'll probably tell me, who do you think you are? And we're bewildered. Haven't we been giving Jesus kudos? Why the turn in his voice? And you will say, Jesus continues, do here the things you did in Capernaum. You'll say, prove that you're the Messiah by giving us special healings, the things you did in other towns. No, Jesus, we're perplexed. We haven't asked for special signs from you. Sure, we assume that you will treat us kindly since we're your kin, and you know us so well, what we need, and we hope you'll give it to us, but we haven't been so gauche as to actually ask for that yet. But Jesus is on a roll. No prophet will ever be accepted in his hometown. We people listening are beginning to look at each other. What is wrong with Jesus? We've been happy to have him back at home. He's such a bigwig now, and who wouldn't be, we are quite sure that he won't forget us. We're quite sure that he won't get too big for his britches. We're not doubters, but Jesus is saying, it's fruitless for me to preach here in Nazareth. And then the final hammer blow comes. We, people of Nazareth, assembled in our Sabbath finest, who have been about to get in line for Jesus' autograph, we hear him rush on with this tirade and say, two of the greatest prophets in all Israel were Elijah and Elisha. They were such men of God that they fearlessly rebuked Israel's kings when the kings worshipped other gods. Elijah and Elisha were such men of God that they could stop the rain from falling. They could raise people from the dead. But when Israel was not following God, God didn't stop blessing the whole world. God just worked through other people who who are not Jewish. People no Jew would consider worthy those non-Jews. Jews were meant to be God's people so that they would be a blessing unto others. When they weren't, God used others. In Elijah's time, Jesus reminds us as we're sitting there, when there was a long drought that parched all the nations, God sent Elijah into Lebanon to a widow who lived there. Elijah miraculously fed that Lebanese woman and her son, keeping them alive. Now, at the same time, Israel had many widows too, but Elijah was sent to none of them. None. And in Elisha's time, Jesus rushes on. When there were lepers everywhere dying of that horrible disease, there was a man from Israel's great rival, Syria, a military general, who had actually killed Israel's king. And Elisha healed that enemy general of his leprosy. Israel had many lepers too, but Elisha was sent to none of them. None. Jesus is beginning his ministry with a crash. Everyone sits at God's table together, he's saying. Everyone. There are no second seatings for latecomers where leftovers are served. God's lavish love won't be thwarted. If those who come to the table early think they're the chosen ones, the insiders, God's apt to reveal God's love among the outsiders. Everyone is meant to sit at God's table together, move over and make room. Ooh, it's enough to make one want to kill that Jesus. Here, as a congregation in Boston rather than Nazareth, might God say this: if you think Christians are my first love and you bar Muslims from your border, I will find a way to serve the Muslims in greatest need. My love doesn't respect your borders. Or might this be God's message? If you think at any time in history that the United States is my first love over Syrian refugees or Latin Americans fleeing gangs, or Russians, Vietnamese, and Iranians, your God will find a way to serve those in greatest need. My love exceeds your borders. Everyone is meant to sit at my table, move over, share your plenty. There's one seating for us all. Or maybe God says this: if you ever thought that King's Chapel is special, and that allows us as a people to seek out only our kind to join our ranks, I, the God of all love, will find a way to serve any you snub. And you will be the lesser for it. Everyone is meant to sit at my table, move over, and make room. 2 weeks ago, the executive director of Common Cathedral preached here on Martin Luther King's Sunday. If you missed her sermon, as I did, it's posted on our website. My conversations with her, Amanda Grant Rose, have indicated how a relationship might grow between us and her congregation. It's something we're exploring. No decisions yet. I asked her, what do your people want? And she said, a place they can worship and sit quietly and not feel looked down upon. What do her people want? Someone to care about them as individuals rather than judge them as addicts or mentally ill or poor, not willing to work. What do we at King's Chapel want? We do want a safe place in which we can worship also. And what else? Amanda talked to me of a relationship that over time could build, where some of our members make sandwiches and donate backpacks, as we've been doing. And a few of us might decide to join Common Cathedral's minister every Tuesday for a few hours, because that's when she meets with members of her congregation. She walks around the one block on which this church sits. There are many unhoused members of Common Cathedral spend their days right here, on Tremont Street or on School Street, Washington Street right behind us, and then coming back up Court Street. I am ashamed because I didn't know that. But every week, their minister greets each one of them by name and asks how they are and gives out warm socks, not money, makes referrals to them when they're ready, remembers that they had an appointment at MGH. Oh, how did that go? Prays with them for a moment, knows that he isn't just a homeless man, but a father of two who writes his daughters every week, recognizes that she is the one who creates art every Wednesday at Common Art, a program Common Cathedral runs, where our member, Emmanuel Genovese, helps make the art with them. We would recognize her and that she's the one who said, I came for the art and I stayed for the love. And oh, hi, we'd say, knowing her by name. Joan Murray lives in Wellesley, and she was a minister at Common Cathedral for years, often seen little change over time among her congregation because addiction and mental illness are so powerful. Often Joan might get no response at all from those she greeted each week, but she kept visiting, and one day a man was missing from his usual spot. She worried, asked after him, and only years later heard from him again. Thank you, he told Joan, because you kept thinking I was worth saying hello to. I finally got up the courage to get help from my addiction. I'm sober now, been for several years. I'm back with my family working. I don't think I would have done it unless you kept coming by. Do you know the difference, Joan asked me, between those with mental illness and addiction in Wellesley and those who have it in Boston, those who are homeless in Boston? The difference is only the family who gets you the treatment you need and the money to keep going back again and again after you relapse. Otherwise, it's all the same. We're all meant to sit at the same table and share what we have. It's infuriating lots of time, but it's God's way and it's love's way. Frankly, it's a way I never will act on my own, but with your prayers and your support and God's support, there's a better chance for me. There's a chance when I keep coming to the table with each of you. Love is patient and kind. Yes, yes. Love is not jealous or boastful. It is not arrogant or rude. Love rejoices in the right, not in the wrong. Love bears all things, believes all things, endures all things. Love never ends.